Thanks everyone for taking the time to come out. So tomorrow at 10:15, this session was got a few more opt-ins, and so they developed a full breakout session on servicing Azure Stack tomorrow. So tomorrow at 10:15, this will be the session code for the full session that I'll give. But today we'll just do a quick 20-minute session, go over what we have. So if you want to provide Azure Stack feedback, this is the team. But let's first start off with who I am. My name is Justin Incarnato. I'm a program manager on the Azure Stack team, and I'm responsible for the update resource provider inside of Azure Stack. So we'll talk today about kind of the problem space, what exists today for Azure Stack, what we built to solve that, and then looking forward, what we're going to do as far as future enhancements. So the problem space. So you guys have heard all day security is paramount. One of the things that we're going to make sure that we absolutely do is ingest updates from Windows Server, because Azure Stack at its core is running a Windows Server instance. Not only the physical hosts, but also the VMs that make up the service fabric and also the VMs that make up the control plane. So not only do we have the physical hosts that we're going to run the updates on, but also the infrastructure VMs that we're going to run updates on. And we want to make sure that each month when Patch Tuesday releases its payload, you'll know about 1709, for example, the updates that came out. You'll have standard Patch Tuesday that releases security payload on the second Tuesday of the month. You'll also have a Patch Tuesday that releases the C release, or the third Tuesday of every month, that contains features and fixes. But each month we will ingest those B releases to make sure that Azure Stack has the ability to import these updates and apply them across your Azure Stack instance. Again, not only the physical host, but also all of the infrastructure VMs. Again, infrastructure VMs from the control plane, infrastructure VMs that constitute the different resource providers that we have that exist in our different service fabric rings, all the way down to the physical hosts. Some of the problem space that we also see is keeping it functional. As we add more services from Azure into Azure Stack, the update resource provider is the only pipeline to get the updates into Azure Stack. Not only security updates, but functional updates, as well as feature updates. So when we add resource provider XYZ into Azure Stack from Azure, the URP is the umbilical to get there. Common problem that we have, if you all have done any sort of administrative work, questions get asked. What do I install? How do I install it? When do I install it? Who do I take my updates from? When do I take my updates? What's the order to install them in? Who do I call if there's a problem? How do I ensure that my business functions and services and applications stay alive during the update process? And we'll talk about the URP in a little more detail. Ensuring business continuity. Don't disrupt my tenant workloads. Now, in single instance cases, for example, in the Windows Azure Service control plane, we have 3 different VMs. We have 2 public endpoints for our tenant portal to access through ARM, and we have 1 administrative endpoint, and that constitutes the control plane in Azure Stack. Now, when we apply security updates to the administrative VM, it's going to bounce, right? So in that 7 to 8 minutes when that VM bounces, I won't have the ability to perform administrative functions against Azure Stack, right? Because it's a single instance VM. The 2 public VMs for our public endpoint, there's 2 instances. We'll service one, let it finish, health check it, put it back into rotation, then service the other in VIP swap at that time. So for those services that are redundant, not only the control plane, but also the service fabric, we have 3 node service fabric. We have 4 different rings that constitute the applications that live inside of a service, inside of Azure Stack. And again, I'm trying to talk a little fast because I know we've only got 20 minutes. Who to call if there's a problem for patch and update, it's Microsoft. What this allows you all to do is focus on other aspects of the business, right? No one wants to do patching. No one wants to get that assigned to them. It's a weekend activity. It's an activity that's high risk based on all the other factors above. What payload do I take? When do I take it? Who do I call? When do I call them? What order? Where do I get them? What tooling do I need? Right? It's a problem that we want to solve. So you all can focus on other aspects of the business. Again, 1 package, 1 install, and I'll show you what that looks like in the portal. So what did we build? We built a fully built-in dependency-aware orchestration engine, right? It updates the physical hosts, the infrastructure VMs, the control plane VMs, not only the service fabric, but also the service fabric runtime. And so when you think about the RPs, the resource providers that live in a service fabric ring, you've got to think about 3 different things. The underlying OS that's hosting that Service Fabric node, the Service Fabric runtime itself, and the application microservice, compute resource provider, network resource provider, storage resource provider, update resource provider, right? All the different RPs that live in. You've got to update all three of those artifacts, all the way down again to the physical host where all our agents live, right? You don't need any outside tooling or integration is required. The URP is native to a multi-node Azure Stack. It's in the ASDK as well, but it'll never run because physics is involved, right? Where are you going to live migrate those off of a one node, right? The P&U experience is inside ASDK, but it's only available functionally in the multi-node environment. So you don't need to go get tools, you don't need to download third party, you don't need to download different requirements. It has no other requirements outside of what's native to Azure Stack. It supports disconnected mode, because you've heard a lot of presentations today where we talk about different organizations. They can't use Azure because they have data sovereignty concerns. They're on a literal submarine. They're beside a racetrack, right? And so in that disconnected scenario, what you have to do is if you buy Azure Stack from an OEM, the OEMs will notify you, hey, update 1710 is available. You'll go download that, go to the Azure Stack portal, ingest that update, right? You need to have an account that can ingest that update. It'll show up in the UI as available, and you run it on your time, right? There's no need to talk to other groups about it. Sort out a maintenance window with your customers. Make sure that they understand you are performing maintenance on Azure Stack, and then run the update when it's good for you to run the update. A lot of people ask me about, well, Justin, man, how long does this thing take to run? We've seen in our labs, in our customer environments, it takes about 2 hours per physical host, right? What's that? It is a long time. So the question she asked was why? So we do things, when you're talking about spaces, right? When you talk about storage direct, we need to make sure that the cluster is in a state that it can effectively take the update. Is the stamp healthy? Is the cloud healthy? When you have 500 VMs to live migrate around, again, physics is involved. And so we want to make sure that we gracefully live migrate those VMs, right? And they happen by default 2 by 2. We want to make sure that there's an available host that those VMs can land on. We monitor that as it's happening. The other nodes, when you reboot one physical node, and that node is coming up, well, Spaces has a ton of IOPS depending on the profile of the other VMs that live on the other 3 nodes. So all that data is going to store up in queue, right? That IOPS is going to queue up. So when that node comes back online, but there's a few other things that happen before it comes back online. We'll go into maintenance mode, we'll evacuate, that node comes back online, we pause IOPS, right? We move those VMs somewhere else. Moving 2 VMs is very different from moving 200. So once those VMs come back online, we also need to evict maintenance mode, say I'm ready for business again, but before we do that, we need to rebalance storage on those physical hosts and make sure that we're equal playing field for the rest of the nodes in the cluster. Then we can evacuate maintenance mode, and then we do a few other checks because there's a ton of other agents that live on those hosts. Make sure that our east-west, north-south communication's good, then we can proceed. So there's a lot of checks and balances that happen. Yeah, you had a question, sir?
Before V12,
yep.
the scale units,
yep.
Is that a linear time or does it get worse?
So we can do some in parallel. And so the question was, as we start to add 8 nodes, 12 nodes, 24, as we start to support higher nodes than, just the 12s, right? We will do those nodes in parallel. So you won't have that 2-hour hit per node. The worst case scenario, ironically, exists on the 4 node because we also have reserve as well. So if a node were to just die for whatever reason, we'll never let you spin up more VMs that can handle on just the 3 because we've got our own infrastructure VMs to think about as well. So as we start to get high, and things like anti-affinity and affinity laws that come into play are a lot more strict on a 4 node than they would be on a 12 node. And, there's just the reserve math that we have to consider as well. So those are good questions. So the operator determines when you install these, right? You'll see the update in the space after you've imported it, and you decide, you'll talk to your customers, hey, what's a good time for you all based on that time period that we've set for our maintenance window. So we will manage the software updates. We'll do things like we talked about, maintenance mode, live migrations, health checks, make sure that we've rebalanced storage, make sure that storage is healthy. We'll do those things to make sure that the update doesn't impact those tenant workloads. Because we want to make sure that we have graceful live migrations, right? And if we can't gracefully live migrate a VM, we'll do a quick migration, right? Pause, move, resume, right? And if we can't do that, we might have to pop that thing with a screwdriver and we've got to evacuate that host. We've got to move all the VMs on that host. So we will actually power down those VMs in the worst case scenario and power them up on another available host. Right? So keep in mind, that's why we want to make sure that you all understand that maintenance windows, keep them like you do for everything else. And just make sure you schedule your updates during those specified maintenance windows. Our OEMs build P&U packages for us that we sign that contain driver updates, for example. Right? So if there's a driver update, we can DISM that update into the OS image that we'll use in the case that we have a field replacement unit scenario. A server just catches on fire for whatever. One of the nodes just dies for whatever. When you bring that node back into rotation, it's equal with the rest of the nodes in the cluster because we've also done P&U and DISM the updates into the OS for the Windows payload, just like we do those driver updates. The OEMs who you purchase the stack from will build these OEM extension packages, hand them over to us as kind of customer zero. We'll sign them because the URP will only process Microsoft signed packages, and that's how we keep you from shooting yourself in the foot or someone being malicious in ingesting a package that we didn't sign. So the URP will actually check for that signature and only parse software packages that we've signed, and then we hand those packages back to our OEM partners that have the drivers, and they distribute them out to our customers. Firmware updates are managed by the hardware lifecycle host. So on a 4-node system, you'll have a 5th node. That's an HPE rig, a Dell rig, a Lenovo rig, a Cisco rig, right? And each of those is a little different, right? Lenovo's xClarity is a little different from Dell's OpenManage, a little different from HPE's OpenView, right? I think I might have got those backwards. But all of those are a little different, and they'll actually manage the firmware update process, not P&U. And we won't manage the switches either, right? Because those are unique to the stamp that you buy from the OEM also. So managing updates. You'll download and import the packages. You'll review important properties. So what happens is actually, it's kind of cool if you're a nerd like I am. You'll actually ingest the update collateral into blob service. The blob service will transport that over to an infrastructure file share. And it's an appliance, so admin can't get into that file share. You can get into the blob service, and you can ingest these packages, and the URP will transmit them from the blob service container over to an infrastructure file share. The URP then looks at that infrastructure file share, and it's looking for a particular file called metadata.xml. And there's a corresponding signed executable and bin files associated with that executable that actually host the payload. But that metadata.xml is actually responsible for things like name, prerequisites, size, support URL. You know, tell me, yeah, Justin, great, you gave me an update, but tell me about this thing before I go install it. Why do I care? Right? And we'll talk about what the deferral policy looks like, how often you can defer updates, and for how long. So once we review important properties, ping your customers, let them know you're setting that maintenance window, install and monitor progress. When we install an update, it gives us high-level steps. Hey, you're on step 3. Hey, you're on step 4. Hey, you're on step 5. There's about 28 steps that constitute an update package at a high level because, again, we iterate from the physical host, the control plane, the service fabric rings, ACS, ERCS, all the different acronyms I could throw at you guys. We iterate everything through from the top of the stack all the way through the bottom of the stack. And there's about 28 steps involved in that process. You can monitor that process. If the update should fail for whatever reason, right, WinRM issue, one of the VMs goes offline, one of the hosts dies, whatever reason, we have idempotency built into the URP, so once you fix that issue, and you may need to call into CSS and break glass and do those things because it is an appliance, once you fix that issue, you can go back to the update space and resume it. And it's a proper checkpoint, right? We pick up at the step we failed at previously, and we start the update again. There's no rollback, so if we deliver a bad package to you all, fingers crossed that we don't, but we're human as well. If we deliver a bad package to you, we won't roll that package back. We'll give you a new package to fix that busted package, right? And you'll import it into Stack just like you did before. And you can download the full logs, and I'll show you what that looks like in the UI as well. So there's a 3-month deferral policy. So here's the good news and the bad news, but I'll be straight with you all. If 1710 update comes out, and that's just year, month, and you say, man, we're okay, Justin, I'm good. Remember, this is cloud, you need to stay current. 1711 comes along, 1712 comes along. Well, once you get past 3 and you say, oh man, I've got this killer feature that's coming out in 1801, I want to take advantage of it. Well, guess what? You're gonna have to install 1710, 1711, 1712, and then you can take 1801. They're not cumulative today. We are working to make them cumulative in the future. It's number one ask on our list, and I'll get into why that is tomorrow. There's a long, nasty, drawn-out technical reason why they aren't cumulative. I won't bore you guys with the details on that right now, but just know that they are not cumulative. So you can absolutely defer. But I didn't know how to say this other than you'll have to pay that sequential tax if you do defer. So try to keep current, if at all possible. And then repeat. I'll give you one of these every month. The security update payload that we get from WDG, from Windows Server, I'll stuff those into a PNU package 72 hours after they release. That package will be made available to you for import and install. So just know that. Hardware OEMs, they may not be sequential. They may not be. You may be able to jump from BIOS version 1102 to 2207. They may not have that requirement. We have the requirement because of the resource providers that we have. It's not so much the binary update problem, it's a schema problem.
But all that is built into the drivers that you're pulling down as
Right.
you're going to do this. So,
Right.
in other words, while they may not be, you're forced to it anyway.
Yeah, and the OEMs can declare a minver. So the OEMs can say, you know what, I've got this driver that's coming out, but I want to make sure that you're at least on 1712 software, right? Because there's an interaction between, obviously, the drivers and the OS. So they want to say, this driver works on 1712. And so if you want to take that OEM package and your stamp's on 1711, you need to install 1712 first, then you can take that OEM package. We'll never have a dependency the other way. When we have a security update come out, we don't care what version your hardware's at. We're going to give you that security update and you can install it. It doesn't work the other way though. And they don't have to declare minver, but they can. And that's again in the metadata. So monthly security payload, feature updates, we have on our radar. Let me check a box that says, hey, if an update becomes available, go get it, transmit it to the file share, unpack it, parse it. If it meets my maintenance window, run it, and just let it go. I need to do a couple other things before that, like cumulative, right? That's a big problem. I've got to solve that problem, and that's our problem to solve. Once we get that sorted, now if you stay current, it's not a problem. But if you're in a submarine, right, you've got to come up at some point, right? If you're on a cruise ship, you've got to dock at some point, right? So that's the thing we got to, so, and I'm going to collect telemetry. So going back to your question earlier, how long does it take and why does it take so long? I want to be able to provide back to customers. There'll be a KB each month with a corresponding update package that says known issues, here's what's in it, here's how you run it, here's how ingest it, here's the fixes that are included in it, right? All that will be laid out. But wouldn't it be awesome if I was able, and I'm not patting myself on the back, we just should do this, and it's one of the other things I'm working on, right? If I can come back and say, hey, based on your profile, you've got about 200 VMs running across these 4 nodes. With this payload, there's 2 vectors involved, right? Payload, which we know, and workloads, which we don't, right? That's up to you guys. Hopefully you're fully utilized and the thing is humming along perfectly and you've got 200 VMs. So moving those 200 VMs is very different from moving 20 VMs, right? And so if I can collect telemetry and you as our customers have to opt in to send that telemetry back, it's not on by default, you guys have to opt in and send me that telemetry, I can then come back and say, hey, based on your profile, based on your usage, I get the data about workloads. Because I know payload, it might not be 2 hours per node. That's worst case scenario. I might, and it's not going to get a ton better, right? I might say it take an hour and a half. But when you talk about 4 nodes, 8 nodes, that time matters. And so I'd love to be able to give you a better ballpark other than 2 hours per physical. especially when you're a ship and you're docked. Right, you're gonna back out at some point, right? And so here's where you can find more information about Azure Stack updates. I'll publish everything here, all the documentation, all the packages, known issues that you can all track and look at. And then that's my, I'm not a Twitter man of the world or of anything. I don't have a ton of followers, but that's my Twitter handle. And every time we release updates for Azure Stack, I will publish it to my Twitter feed as well. So you guys can look at that. So questions, yeah?
So does the number of host nodes increase or decrease the amount of time it takes to do the updates?
Does the number of host nodes increase?
I've got 6 nodes versus 4 nodes.
Yeah.
Significantly longer.
Yeah,
Data around that.
yeah. The number of nodes you have, the number of physical hosts definitely dictates the runtime because we do them slow, safe, and serial at the moment. But once we get past 12 nodes and we start to get in increments of 12s, 24s, 36s, where reserve is not as much of an issue, where affinity, anti-affinity, when we're soft on affinity, right, when those things don't matter as much, we can run those updates in parallel on those physical hosts because we've got wiggle room. Yeah, because we've got wiggle room. So if you all haven't seen the update space or Azure Stack yet, this is a real live portal. And I think Jason Zander's session was actually using this portal, so I was very careful not to click around too much, but I think he should be done by now. But this is what you'll see. Once we import an update, the URP will tell us an update's available, right? And from here, this will take just a second to load, but you have things like the current stamp version. And so if you look at that version string, it's very simple. Major version, minor version, year, month, day, dot build. Right? And it doesn't make, when I first looked, I was like, well, what is that? So when I talk about things like 1709, that's the September release. 1710, that's the October release. And then 1801, right, that's the release we'll have in January. And you can see it parses that metadata XML and says things like publisher, that could be Dell, HPE, right, Lenovo, us, the name, the state, the prerequisite, size, date installed, is not applicable yet because it's not installed, and support path. I can click on this and hit update now, and it will start to iterate through the update process, right? The first thing we do is update the updater, kind of a smart update, make sure that we can update the other bits in the stamp. Update the update, do our Cloud Engine update, and then literally start rolling through the hosts. Once we finish the host live migrate, we'll start with the infrastructure VMs. Some of the singleton VMs that we were talking about were some of the VMs in the control plane, right? The admin control plane. We have domain controllers that don't live migrate, right? Those are pinned to each physical host that they live on, and there's 3 of them. There's an ERCS ring that hosts the emergency console as well as the backup provider, right? And if the stamp ever dies for whatever reason, that's the first ring we're gonna try to resuscitate because then we get the update space back. We can update our way out of that fix. There's what's called an XRP ring that hosts 21 different microservices, and so that's a pretty heavy ring. There's an ACS ring, and there's an NC ring. We'll update all the physical hosts, we'll update all the virtual infrastructure nodes, as well as the artifacts in the control plane. So once this is available, we can actually click this and run this. It'll pop up down here at the bottom, and it'll say things like installing update. It'll show you the progress, and I've got a few screenshots to show you now. So when we go through and update the, and I apologize, I'm keeping you guys long, I hope that's okay. So when we update, we ingest an update. I'll show you all real quick what that looks like. I'll go to storage accounts. I always use the update admin account. From the update admin account, I go to blobs. From blobs, I build just a container name, and I give it some arbitrary name. And this is just a demo rig. So what you'll actually do is you'll import metadata.xml, and that name, properties, date, size, type, all that good stuff. There'll be a signed executable with corresponding bin files that host all that payload collateral. Once you upload those 3 artifacts, the URP will transfer them over to the infrastructure file share. The URP will then parse that metadata and make it available to you to install. And I'll show you what that looks like. Here's the composition of an update package. Here's a custom action plan, and the custom action plan says things like run this first, run this second, right? Update cloud, pre-update cloud, finish, right? And there's 28 steps involved in that. I know this is probably a little extra detail, but let me show you all what this looks like. So here's what those 3 artifacts really look like. When you get this package from us, you'll update these 3 pieces. And I know that's kind of a bummer to update those 3 things, to get an update into Azure Stack. It's very 1995-ish. But that's the only way, because it is an appliance, we can't give you all access. I can't even get access without breaking the glass to copy those bits to the infrastructure file share. But once they get there, that's what it looks like. You'll see an update becomes available in the update tile. You'll actually see it does things like installing and in progress. You click on it in progress, right, and it gives you this high level, right? 0 succeeded, right? 2 are in progress, and any errors that might happen. And I can also download the full logs or refresh on demand. Tell me what step you're on. Tell me what step you're on. And it'll just pull the URP and say, what step are you on? So this is what that looks like. You can see it's doing pre-engine update, which is updating the updater, and then it starts the top level cloud, and then you'll see things like restarting physical hosts, restarting infrastructure VMs, and it'll tell you which VM it's on. It'll actually iterate through that process. You'll see succeeded again, and then when it's done, it sets it to applied successfully, and you'll see you're now at 1709, again, year, month, day.build. So you went from the August 28th build to September 18th. Yeah.
At the airlift, I thought they said that the firmware updates were going to be synchronized with the software updates.
Yeah.
Is that still true?
Yeah, so the question was, are the firmware updates going to be synchronized with the software updates? And the question is, it depends. Yeah, and if we have an emergency critical, 0-day exploit, I'll give it to you in 3 days. It won't get the same amount of testing that the full monthly patch cycle gets, but if, I don't want to say a particular OEM, but if an OEM has some security flaw in their BIOS, we put them under the same mandates as we put ourselves. They have 3 days to issue that fix to you all in the form of an OEM extension package, which is just another word for a P&U package from our OEMs.
During the reboot, because you're going to do the updates, you're going to restart that server.
Yep.
Are the firmware updates staged so that it's invoked and staged on the system, so during the reboot you don't have to go through that several times?
Yeah, the question was, hey, I'm already taking a reboot for these software updates. If I have a firmware update, can I piggyback off of the software update? If they happen at the same time, you could, but I don't know too many cases where they will. Now, if you plan it right, because the OEMs are on a completely different release cadence, right? Their block releases are typically like November and April when I talk to the different vendors, and that could change, right? Because it's up to them. So it really just depends. We want the ability at some point to just reach over and tickle the HLH, for lack of a better term, and invoke that at the same, and just piggyback that off the same time we're doing software updates. That'll require a little more integration and a little more thoughtful planning with their release blocks and ours, because we know our train's leaving every month. Their train does not leave every month. Their train leaves, every 3 months. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so it depends. But that's what it looks like. You'll see the updates applied successfully. If it fails to apply, it'll say needs attention. And you'll be able to download the logs from that previous screen that said download full logs. I'm getting cut off. So I have a full session tomorrow. It'll be a repeat of some of what you all just heard, but I can go into more details on the live migration process, what that looks like, how it works, why we care about affinity, anti-affinity, all those things. I don't know, it's in South. Yeah, just search on my name. It's there's a 45-minute breakout session tomorrow at 10:15 in the morning.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm getting cut off, but I'm going to step right over here. Yeah, thanks everyone.